We're going to hear from Martinas Jusevicius about his Atom Graph management system. But before we start, I would like to introduce George Anadiotis, whom you probably know from his ZD articles. They're very helpful articles about graph databases and quite a bit about semantic graph databases and the whole notion of relationship-rich data. So I'm introducing George today because he is working on a personal knowledge graph, and I think that's squarely aligned with what the solid folks are up to. For example, Tim Berners-Lee's effort that's self-sovereign identity-oriented personal data protection. But George's angle on it has to do with managing social media bits and snippets that are hard to manage. Let's say you've got LinkedIn posts and comments, for example, and you want to keep track of those. How do you do that? At least this is how I understand it. And George is looking for input on how to improve what he's started to come up with. It's not at the point where it's shareable yet. But I just, before we get started with Martinez, I thought, George, can you give us just a bit more background? Is that a fair description of what you're up to?
It is, yes, and thank you very much, Alan, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Many of you, even though we haven't actually met in the real world, I do know your work, so thanks for having me in your group. And yes, Alan was quite precise in his description of what I'm looking to do. And actually, this is a very real example. This is what started the discussion between Alan and myself. So we were having a thread on LinkedIn, actually exchanging some information. And as you can imagine, these things can turn pretty out of control pretty soon. And so for me, that kind of reignited a theme I've been seeing for the last decade, at least, I would say. So, we all have bits and pieces of information that we share and comment on various social media. And, often there's quite some value in that, not only in the links and the information that we share, but also in the comments and the feedback that we get from other people. And I think it would be quite useful if we could somehow, integrate all of this information in one place, using one common format and, map different data models and so on. This is something I have begun to work on, actually have been for a while now. And as Alan very correctly mentioned, it's not yet, at the point where it can be shared. However, I would like to take this opportunity and to take up on Alan's kind invitation to join the group, just to announce that in a way that, this is something I'm interested in, and I have been somehow working on that, not so much on the data modeling aspects. I think, there's some pretty good data models out there that we could use, but more in terms of, the data integration aspects, so connecting different APIs and getting links from different places and this kind of thing. So yeah, I think I'll just cut my introduction at this point and let Martinez go on with his presentation. And anyone interested can, we can take this offline. Thanks again, and looking forward to an interesting presentation.
So George, do you want to put your email in the chat or something, just so everybody can find it?
Yes, absolutely. I will do that. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, George. So there's some opportunity to collaborate on this personal knowledge graph, and it's sort of a way to maybe it could help us out in general with some best practices for people who just want to get started with knowledge graphs. How do they do it simply? What's the use case that everybody can benefit from? So if you'd like to collaborate with George and I on a working group, let us know, because I think it's going to be mutually beneficial. Thanks again, George. So Martinez Justivicius, are you able to present now on your Atom Graph management system?
I hope so. It's been a little hectic the last couple of weeks, so I haven't had as much time to prepare, but I can show something. So I represent Atom Graph, which is not exactly the company name, but it's the trademark that we use. And we're a small company, kind of divided between Denmark and Lithuania. So I'm in Copenhagen right now, and my colleague Džiugas also joined, and he's in Kaunas, Lithuania. And we started working together on linked data probably in 2012. So I promised a demo, but I just want to start with this like introductory kind of slides that we have about what we do and the kind of solutions we provide, and not spend so much time on it, and then go to the demo. So yeah, that's what we do: free your data from silos. It's very much data driven, so it should be familiar to most of you, at least those who know RDF, knowledge graphs, and Sparkle and all that. So we outline the problems as being in the relational data model, basically that it's inflexible and it was created decades before the web, so there's no way it can be native to the web and to the Web 3.0 we're trying to build. And then another problem is that the silos, right? That information is scattered across the enterprise, across different systems and different file formats, and it's there, but nobody can see the full picture of it. And APIs, we also see it both as a solution and a problem, I guess, because of course all companies and services, they provide APIs these days, and I think I read somewhere that the number of endpoints is approaching 1 trillion or something like that. But that means that integration and the data flow between those APIs, it's becoming increasingly difficult, right? The number of integrations is just exploding, and the resources you need to spend on system integration of this growing number of APIs is also, it's getting more and more expensive, right? And then vendor lock-in, that was our third problem listed here, I can see. So something like Neo4j, you're familiar, I guess. Now they're trying to standardize their query language and their whole approach, I think. But for a long time, even though it was a graph database, and it solved that kind of, it solved new cases that the relational model could not, the graph use cases, but it would lock you into their proprietary solution and their proprietary query language, and there was the only product that supported that query language, right? And you basically, either you have nowhere to go if you want to change the database, or it costs you a lot of money to switch products. So, and we'll come to the solution to that. So yeah, this is just an illustration of data silos and how it would require increasing number of connectors to create data flow between systems, right? And yeah, it's growing with the number of data sources exponentially in the worst case. But what we propose, and I think what in one way or another everybody in this group wants to see happen soon, is the Web 3.0 architecture. And the basic, at the core of it, is the knowledge graphs, and it's the RDF data model, because it's the first standard and web native data model, which also happens to be a graph data model, right? And also Sparkle is very important part of the picture as the standard query language from RDF. And then the second part of the solution, and maybe not everyone agrees on that, but at least what works for us, basically, that we can have one uniform API for the web. And it goes back very much to the original vision by Tim Berners-Lee of ontology-driven agents. And okay, I don't want to go into that because it's a topic on its own, right? But in principle, all the linked data services could have one single interface, application programming interface. And how exactly that interface changes the data in the application in the application specific way. So it doesn't mean, you know, the same API does the same thing on all applications, but those application specific operations can be defined in ontologies, right? So yeah, we get back to this model driven and ontology driven solutions. And as a result, you can build web applications basically as renderings of API. So it's just an extra step after the API, which renders the API resources as web pages. So there's no separate effort required like there is these days, that you build a website and you build the API, and they're using the same database, but they're really two separate projects most of the time. And we don't think that's the right way, because the application should be just a rendering of the API basically. Yeah, and there's federation and connecting to external sources, which also something that couldn't be done before. Yeah, and this should be, we should use standards. So W3 standards like RDF and Sparkle and all that family of standards, so we don't have problems like we could get with vendor lock-in and vendors such as Neo4j or, you know, any vendors that offer only proprietary languages or formats, for example. So yeah, just what was this? An illustration how knowledge graph solves the data silos. And the solution that we offer usually for clients is when we build projects, although recently we try to pivot more towards products, as you can see, like standalone products, but we have done a number of linked data based projects for clients as well. So yeah, it's based on two parts, that we can either use the knowledge graph the company has already in place, or we can build a knowledge graph for them. And then on top of, yeah, and the knowledge graph sits in a triple store, of course, one product or another. And on top of that, we provide Linked Data Hub, which I'm about to demonstrate to you. And yeah, it will allow data-driven development, you know, of dashboards and applications. And yeah, I'll try to show it to you now. Okay, so yeah, architecturally it sits on top of a triple store, connects to any Sparkle compliant triple store, right? And then this is an example of what can be done with the default Linked Data Hub interface, and I'll get back to that, what it means. And this is a custom application which still uses exactly the same framework, but just changes up the layout completely, right? But uses the same API and all that. And over the long term, we think that, yeah, you see how the curves go in opposite directions here. And over the long term, I think the savings in here globally could be in trillions of dollars, I guess. But yeah. So here are our contacts, but you have our email. So if you have any questions on anything, just drop us an email, of course. Yes. And link data hub. So I get to that. Can you hear me okay? Is all good?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, that's good. So I think that was maybe no. The link to the blog post was sent around with the invitation, I think. So I'm not sure how many of you read the blog post where we announced the open source release of Link Data Hub. When was it? Maybe a couple of months ago. Even though we have been working on it for multiple years before that. And we continue to work, of course. I don't know, probably never ends. So we call it like WordPress for knowledge graphs, right? But we also created a whole new product category for it. We called it a knowledge graph or data-driven knowledge graph management system, right? And it is powered by okay, I can show you that it is actually open source. You can go to our GitHub and there will be the open source version that you can set up using Docker. Super quick. I'll just move this somewhere here. And it's powered by our link data templates technology, which is at the core pretty much of what we do, at least when it comes to APIs and end user applications. And it's a draft right now, but it's pretty stable and useful, and it's basically what is encoded in Link Data Hub software is this specification. It's an implementation of this specification, right? So yeah, every Link Data templates application is connected to one SPARQL endpoint, and it has one ontology, which has the definition of application. But what it does is essentially translates link data requests to SPARQL requests, and then the response comes back and then is sent back as a link data response. So it's this intermediary layer, you could say, that provides link data over any SPARQL endpoint. And when I say link data, it's both end user application or it's an API, because we mean the same thing pretty much. Depends on the rendering. Could be a mobile app, could be a web app. So I'm not going to go because this is pretty technical, but the interesting thing that it's formally defined, so you could prove basically that it works. So not that many specifications are like that, but I think it's very important that it's formally defined, so there's no ambiguity, and that's very important for interoperability. Right. So essentially, it transforms link data to SPARQL. And where should I go now? Yeah. So this is linkdatahub.com, right? So yeah, Link Data Hub pretty much projects any RDF data set to any application or API that you want, depending on the definition that you feed. And the definition is encoded in an ontology defined using link data templates. So you can use Link Data Hub to explore or analyze existing endpoints, like some external endpoints, or build applications, meaning build a model with classes and constraints, and build a document hierarchy with documents and containers and so on, and populate the instances, for example, by importing data, right? So what you saw here is the open source version on GitHub, meaning that you can run one app which connects to one endpoint, right? And you can check that out and set up using Docker. But linkdatahub.com, it's this managed version where you can have multiple apps, because the apps are managed and even the endpoints are managed for you in the cloud. So you know this software as a service model. And yeah, I've created some things beforehand, but let me show you just how to sign up. And this is using WebID protocol, which works using client certificates. So if you have your own web ID, you should be authenticated on linkdatahub.com already, because yeah, it's a kind of single sign-on. We still need to improve the performance, right? And we will. And just by preparing for this demo, I found a couple of bugs. So if you weren't able to sign up before, try again. You should be. Okay. So it's a prototype, the cloud version itself. So we haven't really announced it anywhere. You're some of the first ones that see it like this. But when we're confident, we will announce it.
So while we're this,
yeah.
yes, couple of questions. One, it'll run on any triple store. Can it run in a on-premise mode? Because some of our clients are still, believe it or not in the cloud yet.
Oh, I'm debugging here. Wait. Sorry. Let me just turn this off. Yes, definitely. So if you look on GitHub, the standalone version is running on. Damn. How did I disconnect? It's running on Docker. So you can either deploy using Docker, or we can also prepare a version for Amazon Marketplace.
Okay.
So that then you have your own private cloud, I guess.
Yeah.
Now I can turn off the debugger and wait a little.
And for the non-open source version, like what is the pricing model, and roughly what's the price of this?
I can't tell you yet because we haven't really figured it out.
Okay.
Yet. Okay. I had a debugger on and I think I forgot to turn it off.
Well, at least we can tell this wasn't an overly scripted demo.
No. Okay, well, something happened. So right, the sign up should have succeeded, and now I should get an email, right? I might try to do it again.
Okay.
Let me see. The internet's not great here. Right, so I've signed up here, and what I have here is a client certificate attached. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but if I go, and it's a little different in every browser. But if I go to settings, and this is specifically Web ID certificate, so yeah, it's all defined in the specification how they authenticate, and yeah, and I import the certificate from the downloads folder, I guess. It's P12, right? Yep, so now I can authenticate with all the applications on linkdatahub.com. But you might need to restart the browser for the certificate to take effect. And we have, what we have here is we have a few demo applications, and under here we have documentation. You should check it out if you're interested in how it works. Yeah, and the demos, they contain something that one of them, based on cost, is more about model-driven application, and then let me show you. Oh, okay, cost is not even there, but CityGraph is meant to show you mostly how CSV imports work. And also, if you go to GitHub, you'll find those so-called applications or demo applications in there, in this repository. But really what it is, it's just, it's a collection of scripts that push RDF data. And then they build up either this ontology that drives the processing or the model ontology. So in that way, it's, even those are scripts, but everything is completely data driven, because the only thing they do is generate data and upload it, right? Mm-hmm. And this whole side here, it runs on one Java web app. So all the subdivisions here, so the first level I forgot to mention is the context. Like it's like a hierarchical subdivision of data spaces. So demo is the context. You can think of it as an account on GitHub. And these are the apps, which would be like repositories on GitHub. And on the cloud version, you can manage them. And I'll show you now. I'll switch to Firefox. I have pre-installed the application a little bit. So when you install the standalone version, this is what you get: one application on one endpoint, powered by one ontology, right? But yeah, let me just go back up. And one more time. Yeah. How much time do we have?
Another half hour, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna skip some things. Yeah, so as you see on the cloud version, this is all managed by the platform. So instead of running another Docker instance of Link Data Hub to get a second app, I can simply create it through the user interface. And
so do any of these apps allow updating to the, directly from the UI to the knowledge graph?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, so let me show you, okay, just real quick, how an app is created, right? And everything that I do through the user interface, it can be done through the command line interface. So, right, I created an application by a click of a button. So let's pretend this is the blank application I created for this purpose, right? So let me create a container. Oops. Something's not right. Yeah, I mean, the link data templates is completely read-write specification. So meaning you can update any data in the endpoint, but as long as it's using the convention of the data set that Link Data Hub understands.
And do you have a constraint mechanism?
Yes, we do. Okay, let me show you. Yeah.
Is it your own, or is it Hackle, or
spin constraints, right? So I tried to save this item without entering title. Yep. It is not very beautiful, but it says title missing, and you get an error, right?
Yep.
So and I enter a title, and I save it. So this blank link data hub is, you could say, as a basic WordPress with no content in it, but all built totally on RDF and Sparkle, right? And you can have HTML content. You saw there was a HTML editor in there. Yeah, we can look at which one do we want. At the link data version of the resource that we created, right? Estes was the title. So behind every page, there's a link data resource like this. And of course, this is all coming from the endpoint behind it. So I've also created some scripts that should build a model basically within this application. So the scripts come from the link data apps repository, and yeah, they should create a couple of classes with yeah, and properties for those classes, and there will be an interface that will allow us to edit those. So I'll just run the scripts here and cross my fingers, and we'll come back to this in a minute, right? So what else I can show you in the meanwhile? For example, that there is a administration application. Oh wait, I already have it here. So where you can manage all the aspects of the end user application, which is the ontologies driving the, yeah, all this link data processing, the model ontologies, which means the entities and the constraints that validate them, and so on. And then access control. This is, yeah, basically access to resources, and you know, which resource and resource classes are allowed for certain agents or agent groups. And yeah, WebID is playing into this. Okay, so one of those like analysis cases, you could say, where you take some kind of external endpoint and you run queries against it and then save your queries on Link Data Hub, for example. This is one of the use cases. And on the other end of the spectrum is building an application for your own endpoint. So there is already an endpoint behind this application, and meaning changing up the model completely, changing the user interface completely, which is based on XSLT, which is also declarative, right? Okay, so let me try to create a Sparkle service for Wikidata. And then I have a query which pulls the American presidents, I guess all of them, and the time period when they served, right? So now I can go to the Sparkle endpoint. Do I have it somewhere? Yeah, here. Just need to refresh, I guess. And of course, the most powerful thing happens when you combine, you know, this application building with the analytical tools, like I'll show you in a minute, I hope, the charts. So you use your application to manage the data in the endpoint. Let's say import CSV, or just create it manually, even though we don't do that much. We usually run scripts right? So we have a reproducible script. Oh, okay, it was there, which can recreate the application if we need to, instead of doing manually through the user interface. Yeah, so we got a result from Wikidata, and these are the presidents, including Trump, I guess. And then we want to see it as a timeline, for example. Yeah, and it's like all dynamically re-rendered, the chart, right? And there's this guy. Yeah, so, and we could save this chart, right? For later use, it will become its own Sparkle or linked data resource that you could reuse it and so on. One more feature, just well, to show you in passing this search here, because we created Wikidata as a resource, and it's now in the system, so our search can find it, right? Now I can click here and go to that resource we just created before for the Wikidata service. Yeah. So let's see how the scripts are doing. It's still running. What else can I say? Yeah, so the basic or the default layout of the dataset that we're using and that gets pushed into the Sparkle endpoint when you create Linked Data Hub open source version, at least, it's well, it looks blank, but it allows you to create blank to start with, but it allows you to create this document hierarchy by creating containers and items in them. So these are the very basic document types, container, item, and well, you know, it's like a file system, files and folders in it, and different linked data resources or like concepts that cannot be resolved directly. They attach to this document hierarchy. Okay, so the script finished, right? And you see something happened, like 2 new containers appeared for concepts and concept schemes. And this is based on this cost ontology, that's why. So, and now those 2 items here appeared as well. So meaning that I can create a new concept scheme, for example, right? And we got this user interface from a Sparkle query that looks like this, which defines, you know, the default properties for a concept scheme. Just a simple Sparkle construct, and this defines it for the concept. So now I can create an instance, right? I have to enter twice because this is a concept, an entity which is paired with the document. So it's actually 2 things you save here. Okay, so we have Estes as a concept scheme, and let's try creating a concept now. We're not so proud of the client-side performances, mostly because it's this XSLT processor that gets loaded every time, but a new version should come out pretty soon, and that will improve things quite a bit. We have Saxon GS. I don't know if you're familiar with Saxon and what it is. Okay, so that's this concept. I'll create another instance. And what we do here, I hope we can choose in scheme that links it to a concept scheme. And if we enter Estes, which we created before, we can pick the concept scheme. We can see the autocomplete is working. So again, we wouldn't create instances by hand like this. Either we would import some RDF data into the endpoint, or we have separate scripts that transform and then import CSV data as RDF. So yeah, I don't think I can show much more in this time, but a couple of things that I want to mention: that if you're into the technical stuff behind it, then you should definitely check out the link data templates specification, because it's at the core of all of it. And at some point, ultimately, we would like to standardize, I guess, as a proper W3C spec, but right now it's not a priority to us because we know it works. We just want to push and implement features that would show why semantic technologies are superior, and basically features that would not be possible without them. So stuff like set-based navigation. I don't know if you know free-base parallax, which is an interface concept from 10 years ago, but it got pretty much killed when Google bought them, and at least I haven't seen it implemented. So that's in our plans. Yeah, what else? Oh, one more thing is, like, there are all these layout options that you can switch between dynamically, right? There's a map, for example. This is another demo application with some geo data. What else? Yeah, some data points in Copenhagen, right? So yeah, and I think this should work as well, the graph mode, because it's quite new, so I can't promise, but let's see. We're not using JavaScript for the user interface, but we're using XSLT instead, which is also declarative. So I think it's an important part of the data-driven architecture. So it worked. There is a graph view as well. It could be better, but it works to some extent. We will improve it, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, the documentation, it's also on linkdatahub.com/linkdatahub/docs. And then there's one more thing. I don't know if you looked on our website. So cases is the various projects that we did, and that's where Link Data Hub, all this processing model, where we got it from, and because it kind of boiled down to the very generic principles. But we have this other product coming up, and it's in a prototype state right now, I could say, and it kind of connects back to what George said in the beginning about personal knowledge graph. But we instead want to build an enterprise knowledge graph out of the cloud services that companies use. So, you know, stuff like this G Suite, for example, or Microsoft Office Online, or Slack and GitHub and Atlassian. So we have prototypes for most of those, right? So we're working on, yeah, deploying it on Amazon Marketplace. So soon we could give you a link to the, you know, to this template, and you can just install it into your private cloud, and you enter some API credentials for those services, and you click a button, and maybe some time passes depending on how much data you have, and you have a knowledge graph with all that data integrated. So yeah, we figured out that much, you know, there could be different products built on top of that. We have different ideas, but haven't decided on anything yet. But if that sounds interesting, and if it connects to George's idea, you should definitely reach out to us, I think. So
Very interesting. When you reach out to all these APIs and bring them in, presumably initially you're using the language that the API uses, and how do you harmonize it to your ontology? Is there another process in there somewhere, or do you do that by hand, or what do you?
With language, you mean format or vocabulary?
Yeah, more vocabulary. Let's say you had an enterprise ontology, and let's say some of your people were using Salesforce, and you go to attach to Salesforce, and you realize, oh, what we call a customer, they call a lead or a prospect, or they call it something else. How do you connect those dots?
Right. So, I mean, usually the data comes back as JSON or XML, right? So one step is that it needs to be lifted to the semantic level or RDFIs. So, you need to build URIs, of course, and build one or another syntax of RDF. But according to vocabularies, so we try to find whatever is the most popular, the standard linked data vocabulary. So, for example, for Slack data, we use SIOC ontology, and for Gmail, we found some specialized email ontology, I think. Yeah, so we will map. If there are multiple services that expose emails, we will map them to the same vocabulary, that we think is the best, right? So there is a mapping already on that level, but more complicated is probably the mapping between Google and Slack, for example, and how much overlap there is, and that depends, I guess, on different pairs of services. But at least people seem to be the common overlap. You can use email addresses to at least identify users who are the same. But if you're interested, take a look at our website and give us a shout. So I think I'm done. It took way longer than I wanted, but that
was excellent.
Please, questions I would be happy to answer.
So who's got a question?
So hi, this is Imran from Schneider Electric. I have just two questions. One regarding this platform, Octopus. Do you also plan to target the operational data coming from operational technology like industrial automation or process control, because that is more tricky to harmonize and there's a lot of heterogeneity. But do you have any plans, any intention to consider those areas as well? And the second question is regarding the competitors. For your Open Data Hub platform, do you think that the existing offers like Mobi or MetaFacts are doing something similar? How different your platform is from them? Thank you.
Thanks. I know MetaFacts. I'm not sure I know what was Mobi. What was the other name?
Yeah, it's Mobi. I'll push the link in the chat.
Okay, because I don't think I'm familiar with those. Okay, let me start with the second one. So I've seen MetaFacts a little bit. They're offering on Amazon Marketplace, and I think they have some impressive UI when it comes to this analyzing use case, running queries, building queries, pulling out the data that you want, and maybe some facets, and visualizing it. So they're pretty good at it. But if you take a look at their pricing, it's like tens of thousands of dollars per year. And we offer much similar version right now, I guess, but it costs nothing. And I'm pretty confident that we can build the parallax navigation. I don't know, I guess there is a way we can share links afterwards, so I'll send it to you, where you can jump from a set of data, jump through a property. Let's say you have a list of US presidents, and then you choose their children or something as a property, and you jump to a list of the children of the US presidents, you know? So this kind of navigation, I haven't seen it anywhere really, but it allows you really intuitive and flexible way to drill down to data. And I think that could be our edge over MetaFacts and other competitors. Moby, I don't know, I'm sorry. And then I think this application building side of ours is much stronger, or at least we know it can be, because the foundations are solid and they've been checked in a number of projects, and this specification can be formally verified. So we know it's not wrong. It's just we have this generic platform which can be used in different domains for any kinds of data, and we can continue building generic features on top of that with, you know, and they can be specialized in different verticals and extended and overridden and so on. But what we publish right now is like a core or the base, and it will only get better, I think. And coming back to your industrial data, is it like things like IoT, Internet of Things? And I guess the same approach could be applied, because we use streaming transformations to RDFs. So I think it's pretty important when you have, yeah, I mean, I pulled my own Gmail data and it was like 3 gigabytes of emails, and not even all the, I didn't take all the content, right? So you want this, and you know, it goes into gigabytes in large enterprises, I guess. And so you want the transformations to be streaming, and we have figured that. So I guess the same technology could be applied to IoT. But for Octopus, initially, the idea was just to take the cloud services that, you know, are popular and they have APIs that are easy to connect to, and that they have something in common, you know, like users at least. But if you have some use case in mind, I mean, I can't say it would work, but give it a try.
Okay, thank you. I'll look into it.
Yeah. Anyone else? We have another minute or two. No, this is pretty, this is very impressive. That example where you federated over to Wikidata, do you have the option of either, you know, just doing it transient, that it's in memory, or the option of persisting it into your graph?
I lost it somewhere. You mean persisting the data or the query?
The data. Is that an option here?
In principle, yes, right? Because it just has to end up in the endpoint somehow.
Right. Yeah.
Well, not that I can think of like within the system right now, but
okay. Yeah, I mean, I could imagine a use case like that, you know.
Well, I mean, okay, you can, you know, there's this whole linked data browser site which we haven't explored that much. So if I take our, you know, homepage is also running on Linked Data Hub, by the way. So let's see. This should also work as a linked data browser. Let's see. So we get the content from the homepage. Not completely the same rendering, but close, right? So you could probably save. We haven't done this yet, but you could save the linked data resources that you browse to your own system, right? Yep. So that would be much easier. But yeah, I mean, save a query result, it's the same principle. So I guess we could add that too, you know, just needs a button or something.
Martinez, could I just ask about how you view handling the problems of high availability situations where you need load balancing and where you've got quite a bit of interactive stuff with a backend through this sort of model-driven approach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of traffic yet because we're not announcing it really, because we're just working on it still. So I can't answer to you, I get, but I mean, caching is one solution because we have, even in the open source version, if you set it up using Docker, there will be varnish cache as a component. So if your app is doing a lot of repeated queries, so there's no point of hitting the triple store again, you know. You can have a caching layer in between, like varnish, which will pick up those repeated results. And then another long-term, I guess, implementation detail is streaming as much as we can, right? So if right now we take data from a triple store and we build up a graph in memory that we can render them, but in principle we can even render the user interface in a streaming mode because XSLT 3.0 supports that, right? So you don't build, yeah.
The problem that I find with things, I mean, most of my experience is with XML applications where you have got problems if you have to build up the whole document before you start pushing it out. And that, I guess, is where in this sort of area, linked data fragments and pushing a lot of the stuff to the client so that you're not doing everything server side is part of the general game plan to improve performance. But yes, my concern is always how we would cope with something where you had, you know, a single service that was getting hammered in a duplex way, data coming in, data going out.
Right. So definitely we were moving more processing to the client side. Even queries are being built partly on the client side. But I guess it would be threefold, like I said, caching and streaming, you know, not instead of building out graphs in memory, just stream it from the triple store, pass through your system and stream it to the end user. And then for load balancing and stuff like that, I would just go to Amazon Web Services and choose some kind of elastic, you know, loading solution. I'm not like completely familiar with that, but just a little bit. And then basically it should scale up containers for you after demand, right? So that's it.
Yeah. Do you see any role for HDT?
HDT?
Yeah.
The binary format?
The high density triples.
Yeah. I mean, makes sense for data that it's not changing because I don't think you can update those files really. So for read-only data sets, it makes a lot of sense, right? So if you want to set up your own linked data hub, so you can choose Fuseki, which supports HDT, and you should be good to go. But you won't be able to update that service, I think.
Okay, I was kind of thinking about that sort of thing operating on the client, because I think that some of the stuff that Imrupt are doing have got HDT on the client, and you're using it as a way of pushing large volumes in a compressed form.
Right. I mean, we have similar goals, I think, with Solid, but quite different approaches to implementation. And yeah, they have hundreds of things really going on with different technologies. Well, we keep to Spark basically and XSLT most of the time. So we just need to make them stream more, you know, and yeah, I guess that's the approach for us at least. But XSLT 3.0 does streaming transformations. It's pretty complex, but it does that. I don't know if you know, but check it out.
XSLT 3 is fabulous, and with Saxon JS, yeah.
That's the plan. We're waiting for Saxon VS 2.0.
Okay. Thank you.
Peter. Other questions before we sign off? We're running long, but we do want to get a couple more questions in if there are any. Don't be shy. If there's anything else, no, go ahead.
Just so, is there like a mailing list as well? I mean, somewhere we can share groups and share links and things.
Yeah, we have an email mailing list that Melissa helps out with, and we also have a LinkedIn group. We'll I think Melissa, when she's able to be on the mailing list as it stands, Martinez.
Okay.
And we'll share out that link to the group. So
Okay.
and we have these monthly calls where we get together like this one, and then there's an annual conference in February that's in Colorado.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I can send out information on that stuff for those who aren't familiar.
Yeah.
Really helpful, interesting product you've got there, Martinez. And
it's just only the beginning. I need to tell you. I mean, it can go way further than this.
It's a very helpful approach to this because it's so standards based, and we're looking for more of these things, not less. So thanks so much for showing it to us. I'm sure others on the call are going to be starting to tinker with it and see what they can do with it. So great to have you.